30 miles from modern-day Mexico City lies Teotihuacan, the spectacular city of the gods. It was already an abandoned ruin long before the time of the Aztecs, who regarded it as the birthplace of the sun. The Spanish conquistadors had been so overwrought by the city's majesty, one of their earliest chroniclers had written,
"There is now no cause why we should any longer doubt of Atlantis. The discovery and conquest of the Indies do plainly declare what Plato had written."
150 years after Columbus had discovered America, such sentiments would inspire one man to come to this city of silence and search for physical proof of the lost legacy of Atlantis. A search that was bound up in his own quest to discover himself. Though much of his story has been forgotten, Don Carlos Siguenza was among the most brilliant men of his age. A poet, mathematician, astronomer, and engineer, Siguenza was also one of the first archaeologists in history. Born in Mexico City, Siguenza was a Creole and considered an inferior by the country's Spanish rulers.
Siguenza was a Creole, which means he was descended from Spanish parents. Although we know now that perhaps there were Creoles who had part indigenous blood. They were not at the same level as Spaniards. They were not equal. They were inferior.
Overcoming the prejudices of Mexico's Spanish overlords had become Siguenza's self-appointed task from an early age. He was determined to prove that the ancestors of Mexico's Indians had once forged a culture to rival ancient Rome. Siguenza had first learned of Atlantis while studying to be a Jesuit, where he came across the work of Athanasius Kircher, whose 1665 map of the lost continent was the first in history. Expelled from the Jesuit order for his lack of discipline, Siguenza turned to science, making groundbreaking studies of eclipses, before journeying to Teotihuacan to see the city's ruins for himself. What he found there overwhelmed him. Carefully measuring and recording everything he could, Siguenza found Teotihuacan's layout truly mystifying. A puzzle that appealed to his mathematical talents and would bring him back to this ruined city time after time. The city bore all the hallmarks of an advanced civilization, and Siguenza found evidence of astronomy, hieroglyphic writing, and pyramid building that was uncannily similar to that of ancient Egypt.
He saw many parallels between Egypt and the early Mexican culture in the calendar, in the way of dress, in the hieroglyphics, and in the pyramids.
Could the two civilizations have been related?
I have been stimulated by the great love which I have for my country and in which would be found exceedingly strange information. This data will probably die with me on account of my great poverty.
But fortunately, some of Siguenza's works did survive, and we know that amid these vast monumental ruins, he believed that he had found the answer to the ancient riddle of Atlantis.
What he was trying to do, I believe, was to connect Atlantis, Plato's ideas, with the Bible. Siguenza would have jumped from the myth of Atlantis, which would have been kind of the foundation for him, to biblical prophecy of people dispersing across the globe after the deluge.
Fusing scientific ideas with his deeply held belief in the truth of the Bible, Siguenza concluded that the destruction of Atlantis and Noah's flood had actually been one and the same event. A vast deluge, which had swept away a forgotten civilization, forcing its survivors to seek refuge in both Egypt and Mexico, where they built the pyramids before vanishing from history. Siguenza believed that if he could show that Mexico's pyramids contained hidden chambers, as the pyramids in Egypt do, his theory about Atlantis would be confirmed. Under the hot Mexican sun, Siguenza and his servants spent many days trying to find a way into the abandoned city's pyramids. But the attempt ended in failure, leaving Siguenza frustrated and in despair that he could never convince skeptical Europeans of the true achievements of Mexico or its connection with Atlantis. Even worse, disaster was about to strike. In 1692, a riot broke out in Mexico City, provoked by cruelty and mistreatment from their Spanish overlords. Mexico's native population rebelled. Fires spread throughout the city. A mob broke into the Viceroyal Palace and set the country's national archives ablaze in one senseless act of vengeance. Siguenza raced to the scene. The archives contained countless documents that dated back to the time of the conquest. It was a vast body of evidence in which Siguenza hoped one day to find proof of his theories about the Atlantean origins of Mexico. Again and again, Siguenza plunged into the inferno, trying to save what he could. In desperation, he began paying rioters to salvage books from the flames. His entire wealth spent on saving just a few records.
I cut beams and pried open doors, and by my own effort, the best archives of the city were a rescue from the fire.
Because of his efforts, much of our knowledge of early Mexico and its conquests have been preserved. Tragically, after his death in 1701, most of Siguenza's own works were lost. With no means to date the great citadels and pyramids of Teotihuacan, Siguenza could never have known that the city did not reach its height until 750 AD, 10,000 years after the date Plato gave for Atlantis' destruction. But Siguenza was right about the secret of these pyramids. They did contain burial chambers hidden deep within them, a fact that was only discovered 3 centuries after his death.